Well, welcome to another Friday night. We've been looking at life traps or prisons that come out of complex trauma, things that children needed to do to survive or to try to get their needs met. So patterns of coping that developed became part of their subconscious brain, and they worked for the child. But now in adult life, they're not working so well. They're causing all kinds of damage, pain, and hurt to self and others. But what people find is they see that it's hurting themselves and others. They want to quit, but something keeps them doing it. It's like they're in a prison to do this thing. And we've been looking at the common prisons that come out of complex trauma. And today, I want to look at one that's quite subtle, but it is so damaging. Many people don't see it as super bad, but it is very damaging. And that is developing a mindset that is very negative and critical. It's an attitude and an action. So a lot of people, when they think of negative and critical, they just think of a person who goes around and verbalizes criticism constantly and is constantly negative. And it can include that. But what we're talking about goes way beyond that. This is into your mind. This is how you think. This is your attitudes deep inside of you that have a very negative flavor perspective. It's a mindset. It's choosing to look at things and see things always from a negative perspective in a negative way. So somebody has said this, a common but very dangerous and often unnoticed headspace for those with complex trauma. They are marked by an overall discontent and find fault with just about everything. Now, what's important, I think, to understand as we begin this is that many people with a negative critical mindset, they can actually feel that they're happy most of the time. They can do lots of fun things every day. They can laugh a lot and they go, I don't have this negative critical mindset. I'm a happy person. What they need to do is get beyond the exterior, what they present to the world, and get deep inside themselves, into their mind, into their inner world, into their subconscious brain. And what they begin to find is there's a lot of negative. Take it further. Many people that come out of complex trauma, if fight, flight didn't work, they had to freeze as a way of surviving. But some had to go beyond just freezing because they still needed their parents to take care of them, so they had to go to fawning. They became people pleasers. They became chameleons. They could wear masks. They could do whatever you want me to do, be whatever you want me to be. I'll be sweet. I'll be pleasant. Just don't hurt me. And so they appeared to be the sweetest, kindest people in the world, but that's just their survival thing. What we're going to look at is for many fawners that look to be the least negative, the most positive, the most wonderful, sweet people in the world, actually can have this negative, critical mindset. So just imagine you could follow a fawner around for a day. Maybe you are a fawner. And you would hear and watch them, what they do and say to others, but then you had the ability to hear what was going on in their head that nobody else was ever going to hear. So they go to work and they say to their colleague, "Hi, good to see you. How are you doing?" That's what fawners do. But then in their brain, they're going, "You jerk, you're a disgusting person." Or they go to on a coffee break. And what are they listening for? They're listening for gossip. They're listening for any complaints about the boss, about fellow employees, about their wages, about their working conditions. They're looking for negative. They're getting drawn into that. They go home and they say to their partner, "Hey, how was your day? So good to see you." But then inside they're going, "Oh, I wish I didn't have to come home to this. This person's a terrible cook. Look, they didn't take care of themselves, blah, 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 negative, negative, negative." Then they go out into an evening and they're smiling and they're dancing, but in their brain, they are noticing 10 things wrong with everybody in the first 10 minutes. That's their whole orientation. That's their mindset. So we're not talking about just what is presented externally to the world. We're talking about that internal world within the person that maybe only they know about. But what I want you to understand is this. The longer a person stays in this mindset, it doesn't stay stagnant. It grows. And gradually others begin to see little bits of negativity, more and more. Often it's only their most intimate relationships that begin to see it first. But every once in a while, the mask cracks and people begin to see the truly negative, angry person underneath. So what happens as this grows is there's more negativity, there's a darker internal world, a more angry internal world, less joy, and people around you stop enjoying being with you. They don't enjoy your company anymore. You're not fun to be with. So let's get to the test that we always start with, just to get us thinking about some of the characteristics. So answer 1 if this is completely untrue of you, 2 if it's mostly untrue of you, 3 if it's slightly more true than untrue, 4 if it's moderately true, 5 if it's mostly true, and 6 if it describes you perfectly. And if you get a 5 or 6 answer to any of the questions, regardless of your score, then this could be a very significant life trap for you. So number 1, I complain a lot. 2, I have a tendency to blame others for my problems. 3, I have a tendency to be sarcastic. 4, I often criticize people. The first thing I look for when I meet someone is a flaw. 5, I enjoy ripping someone to pieces in my mind, and I do so regularly. 6, I often have a victim mentality. 7, I always expect the worst. 8, I dwell on bad news. 9, I become very negative when I'm in a hurry and nobody's cooperating and helping me. 10, I become very negative when I'm wanting a bigger bubble, more space to myself, when I don't want to be present to loved ones and they're not respecting that. So the score, if you get a 10 to 19, this doesn't probably apply to you. 20 to 29, it might apply to you occasionally. But 30 to 39, it's probably an issue for you. 40 to 49, probably a very significant issue for you. And 50 to 60, probably one of your core life traps. Now, just to give us a perspective on this topic, negative and critical is vague and it's big. So I want to give you different types of negativity that people can have. So the first is cynicism. And this is just the person who just mistrusts people. He's cynical of everybody. And so it doesn't matter what good they're doing. He doesn't trust that their motives are good. He's cynical about their motives. Second is hostile. And it's a person who just doesn't like people. And so they're just unfriendly to everybody. They don't want to develop any relationships. So part of that is they're just negative towards everybody. But there's really an anger, hostility underneath it. Third is the person who filters out all the good stuff that's happening and only sees the bad. And so their brain has been trained to not see things accurately, but to filter out the good and focus on the bad. Then the fourth that can come out of complex trauma is polarized thinking. And so it's all or nothing. And so if you're not perfect, then you're all bad. If I find one flaw in you, then you're a bad person. I want nothing to do with you. You're terrible. Then the jumping to conclusions, jumping to worst case scenario. So there's a bit of bad stuff happening. Something terrible is going to happen. Catastrophizing is part of that, and we did a talk on that a couple weeks ago. Then blaming. So it's the person that if I'm going through problems, I'm not going to look internally to see if I'm part of the issue, I'm going to look externally and find fault out there and blame somebody or something for the problems I'm having. So I will be negative so that I can blame. And then emotional reasoning. If I'm having a negative emotion, then I'm not going to look internally. I am going to say it's because of something in my external environment. Then it's called heaven's reward fallacy. It's kind of got a religious connotation. So some religious groups basically teach that this world is an evil place. This world is full of pain. It's a vale of tears. It's a trials and tribulations. All your joy is going to come in heaven. And so what can happen for some people is they almost feel guilty if they feel too happy in this world. They feel, I got to be sad and struggling all the time because that's the way it's supposed to be in this world. I need to then be negative all the time in order to kind of be spiritual. And that comes out of their teaching. So let me go into where does this negative critical attitude come from? And what we're going to see is it can come from all kinds of different things within a child's upbringing. So you could have one or both parents who were just very negative. They found fault with everything. They found fault with you as a child. Didn't matter what you did, how well you did it, they'd still find something wrong with it. They found fault with all the circumstances in life. And so now you still hear their voice in your head, and it's now become your internal critic. That doesn't matter what you're doing, where you are, you find fault with yourself, you find fault with everything. Or you had a parent who was a narcissist. They thought they were smarter than everybody, they thought they were better than everybody, and they needed to always be putting others down. They needed to always find fault with everybody to prove they're better than them. They saw themselves as the judge of everybody. Or you had a parent who just constantly, wherever you went, the first thing they would talk about to the family was to point out the weaknesses of everybody. That was just their go-to number one thing they did in every social setting, every new situation, every new relationship. Some families, they use this negativity to create loyalty. So they desperately wanted their kids to stay loyal to them. And so they said to their kids, family's all you got. So you got to be loyal to family. But then to really drive it home and actually create fear, then they would find fault with all the other kids in the neighborhood, all the other families in the neighborhood. And that was designed to drive the kids to greater loyalty. Some children grew up with racism. So their parents were racist. They constantly found fault with people from different races. And there was just a negativity all the time about people who were different than them. Others grew up with parents who were very self-righteous. They needed to feel morally superior to everybody. Oh, we don't do what they do. We don't engage in the activities they engage in, so we're better than them. So they were constantly looking for all the moral failures of others in order to feel better about themselves, to feel superior to them. What I'm wanting you to see is most of this negativity comes out of shame. So the parents that were doing all of these different things, they were trying to find a solution to their shame. So what do you do to try to find a solution to your shame? Because you naturally feel inferior to others and not good enough? Well, let's find fault with everybody. Let's put everybody down. Let's make everybody, in my mind, inferior to me. That way I'll feel superior to them. So negativity and critical stuff becomes, to the brain, of a major solution to shame, when actually it ends up feeding shame. Another thing that some families did was they would have their own standard for how you could behave that was quite realistic. But then they would set an unrealistic standard for everybody else. So other people weren't allowed to be human. Other people weren't allowed to have flaws. Everybody had to respond to you perfectly. And if they didn't, well, now we can criticize them. Now we can look down on them. So they operated by one standard for themselves, unrealistic standard for others. Another common thing that happens for many coming out of complex trauma is they find parts of themselves that they've been criticized for, punished for, and they hate. So they hate their sensitivity. They hate that they cry so much. They hate that they get angry so much. They hate that they don't handle their emotions well. But then what happens, without them often even realizing it, is they suppress all of that and deny that they have those problems. But now when they see somebody else who cries a lot, or who has problems with their emotions, or anger, or they're very sensitive, they criticize that person. They go, what a loser. Look at them. They can't do that. And so now they project actually their own issues onto others and criticize others when it's really their own issue. Another thing that happens is if somebody disagrees with you, well, they're making me look stupid. They're saying I'm stupid. So the response of the parents to anybody that disagreed with them was to tear a strip out of them, to make them look stupid, to tear them down, to be negative and critical. Or if somebody came to them that they didn't really want to listen to, but the person was giving them really good advice, constructive criticism, but they weren't open to receiving it, what was the way they could discount the message? Discount the messenger. So let's find fault with the messenger. Say, oh, they're a loser. Their marriage is in trouble. They can't even take care of their kids, so I don't have to listen to what they say. So to discount the message, I have to discount the messenger, so let's use negativity. Other shame-based parents resent the success of other families in the neighborhood because it makes them look bad. And so part of what they do when they resent the success of others is they got to make others look bad. So they start finding flaws and failures in others to bring them down a peg or two so they can feel superior to them again. Others, they want to be angry. Anger is what gives them energy. Anger is what is their identity. They're addicted to anger. But they have to justify being angry. So how do they justify being angry? By being negative. Well, if I wasn't that, look at how bad my life is. Look at how much of a jerk that person is to me. Look at how unfair these circumstances is. I should be angry. And so negativity becomes a way to justify being angry all the time. So what I want you to see is people now are using negativity as a tool to try to get different needs met, to try to justify unhealthy behaviors. It's a multiple usable tool in their toolkit. So another way they use this tool is they don't know how to set boundaries with people, but they don't want relationships with people because they've been hurt too much. They don't trust people. So how do they keep people away from them and not be interested in people? Just find fault with people. Be super negative about everybody in your mind. That then justifies isolating and never building relationships. Some people grew up in a place where their parents were very religious. They had all kinds of rules about drinking, dancing, tattoos, makeup, hair, clothes you wore, places you went, all like rule. And what happened because of that, it was a very black and white world where you either were doing the right thing or you were doing bad things, is it made them feel superior to everybody because they were keeping all the rules. It enabled them then to look down on everybody else, and they could point out all their faults. It really fueled a constant negativity towards everybody else. Some people grew up in a shame-based culture. And one of the things that happens in a shame-based culture is you don't control a child so much by creating a healthy conscience about what is loving and what is unloving. The concern is you got to conform to the way we do things around here, to the rules of this family. Doesn't matter if they're healthy or not. It's the way we've always done it. And so how we control the children and manipulate the children is if they break a rule, they're not doing social etiquette properly, then everybody gets negative towards that child. And that child starts to feel, I'm going to lose this family if I don't conform. And so it becomes a way of manipulating people to do what you want, is just to be super negative towards them. But then another thing can happen in families. So many families that are full of pain and hurt don't share intimately. That's very superficial. Everybody's afraid to go deep. Everybody's afraid to be authentic and vulnerable. But the only time they get really deeper and more intimate is when they're being negative about everybody else. But that feels good. We connected at a deep level. We had some deep intimacy by gossiping, by complaining. But then a child can also realize that when they start complaining about everything and being very negative, often it gets them positive attention. Everybody now rushes to them and has empathy towards them and validates them and cares for them. And it gets a positive reward. Others, what they find is they weren't allowed to talk authentically and openly about all kinds of different things. But when they got negative and they got angry and complained, they could just let it all hang out and it felt good. And everybody allowed them to do it because everybody else was doing it. So the only relief valve that they had, the only way to release all the pent up anger and pressure inside of them was to have a really good rant and complain. And it was therapeutic. It felt great in the moment. Some of you grew up with a parent who was so negative that it built up so much pressure that they would come out of their bedroom in the morning determined to have a fight because they needed a fight to relieve the pressure. But they first needed to justify a fight. And so what did they do? They just started looking for something negative. And as soon as they could find something negative, well, that justified them getting angry, starting a fight, and then that would relieve their pressure. So all of those different environments create negativity, but then twist and use negativity as a tool to try to accomplish good results, to try and hurt other people, to try to get what you want. It becomes a multifaceted tool that has good intentions, but bad ways of getting there, bad intentions, self-protection, all kinds of different things. So let me bring it to the complex trauma perspective and just help you begin to understand at a little deeper level what's happening with negativity inside a child with complex trauma. So if you look at a child growing up where they're abused or neglected, where they're not connecting with anybody, where they can't be authentic, where they're being hurt, where they can't resolve problems, their life is negative. They got negative emotions, negative circumstances. They can't resolve them. They don't have support. They're feel all alone. They feel it's all their fault. Life sucks. Life is negative. And so it's a negative world, but it's their normal. And what they don't realize begins to happen is their brain begins to adapt to this is normal. This is what life is. It sets up a subconscious template. And so what then happens as they get into adult life is that they need to feel negative and crappy to feel normal. If they felt too good, if they felt everything was wonderful, they'd feel it was wrong. They'd feel they're doing something wrong. They'd feel weird. They'd feel uncomfortable. So their brain says we need to feel negative, crappy, finding fault all the time to be able to relax, to feel normal. That's the template that gets set up. And now the brain has that as a default setting. So no matter what is happening in your life, it wants to gravitate back to feeling crappy. And how does it do it? By being negative. More than that, what happens to a child who's getting hurt all the time, who's getting disappointed all the time, is that they begin to think the way to get hurt less is to constantly look for danger, to get focused on finding negative. So they train their brain to look for negative, not to look for positive, not to see things accurately, but to constantly, first and foremost, find negative. But more than that, what is happening because of all the unresolved pain and unmet needs and lack of connection and lack of authenticity is the child is developing shame. They feel it's my fault that I'm being abandoned or neglected. I must not be good enough. I must be a terrible person. I must be unlovable. What's happening with that? You're developing a negative core identity, negative feelings towards yourself, an internal critic that's always finding fault with yourself. You're becoming super negative at the core of your being, and it's all about yourself now, not just about your circumstances or the people in your life. But more than that, what comes out of the shame is that you believe you do not have inherent value. I must not be worth anything because nobody wants to connect with me. Nobody values me or validates me. Nobody is loving me. Nobody is giving me attention. So if I am to have value and I want value, I either have to earn it by doing all kinds of things, or I can find value by putting other people down. And if I can make other people seem inferior to me, then I'm going to feel better about myself. I'm going to feel more valuable than them. So I am going to develop the ability to criticize and find fault with others so I feel better about myself. What else comes out of the shame thing is a lot of children think that the way to feel better about themselves is to do everything perfectly. But what they don't realize is that by trying to do everything perfectly, they set the bar at an unrealistic height that they can never attain, and so they're constantly failing. And that then feeds more negativity towards themselves. Another thing that many people have to do to survive in complex trauma is if I'm going to get my needs met, if I'm going to not get hurt, I have to be able to manipulate others, which means I have to gain leverage over other people. What's one way to gain leverage over people? Get dirt on them. Find out negative about them. Then use that against them. Use that to blackmail them. Use that to give me what I want. So I need to find as much dirt on everybody else so that now I can use it as ammunition against them. More than that, many children grew up with a parent who was a narcissist, a parent who had never accepted responsibility for their own failures, for what they do to hurt others. They would never change because they're afraid of ever getting honest about how they felt about themselves. So they blamed everybody. And so what happens for so many people is they grow up and they just find fault with, well, the reason I did that is because this person's such a jerk, or these circumstances are so hard. So I need negativity to justify my own failures. I have to blame somebody else. Another thing that happens for many people with complex trauma is they get into situations and then they go, this is too much, this is boring, I can't do this, I'm failing, I want to quit. But they don't want to quit just out of the blue because then they'd look bad. They need to justify quitting. So how do they justify quitting? Well, let's find fault with the job. Let's find fault with the boss. Let's find fault with other employees. Then I can justify quitting. So how do I do that? Well, I got to find fault with everything. I got to be negative. So again, you train yourself to look for flaws in order to protect yourself. Other people, their spouse says to them, you need to change. You are not being the dad you should be. You are not being the friend you should be, the spouse you should be. You desperately need to change. They see that academically, but they do not want to change. They're afraid to change. So how do they justify not changing? Well, they go to a course. They go to counseling. They come home and they go, teacher was terrible. Counselor was a jerk. Not going back. So the way to not ever change is to find fault with every medium that would produce change. Another thing that happens with so many people in complex trauma is they get enmeshed. They get taken over. They lose themselves to powerful people. They lose their needs, their rights, they just give. They lose themselves. And they don't want to do that again. So they have this deep fear of powerful people. So how do I avoid being enmeshed again? Find fault with powerful people. Just find everything you can to get a hate on towards powerful people. That way you'll never let them get close to you. For many people coming out of complex trauma, the best way to never get disappointed is just find fault with everything. Yeah, it's all terrible. It's all terrible. That way you never get your hopes up. That way you never get disappointed. Flip side, for some children who so long for connection, the only way that they could connect with a parent was they had a very negative parent who was always complaining, always feeling sorry for themselves, always blaming. And so they joined the parent and became negative too. And they felt a closeness to the parent, a connection to the parent that was wonderful. So again, so many things that come out of this upbringing, complex trauma, that make this a tool necessary for survival, a tool that gets distorted to try to meet all kinds of different needs, but now causes so much trouble. So let me just quickly summarize characteristics of a person with this negative critical mindset. Constant complaining, simmering anger that's just always below the surface, regularly blaming others for your problems, finding fault with everything. It's like nothing is ever good enough for you. A strong inner critic, constant negative towards themselves, very judgmental, often very pessimistic about everything, quite disrespectful, not externally, but in your mind. You can be very respectful externally, but in your mind it's very disrespectful. There's a lack of true empathy and compassion or interest in others because you're just negative towards them. You look down on them. There's a self-righteousness that's part of this. You just need to feel superior to others in every situation. For many people, you appear to be a very logical, analytical people where you're trying to discern, is this person healthy or not? Is this person a narcissist or not? But what we find as you start to look deep inside of you is that all of your analytical abilities has a negative bent. You're looking for negative. That's why you're analyzing. Many with this are very argumentative. They give a lot of criticism, but it's not constructive. It's designed to hurt, to put down. They're often irritable and impatient. They have many insecurities themselves. They assign negative motives to good actions. So if they see somebody who's successful financially, in their mind they go, oh, they're probably dirty, or they're probably a workaholic and neglecting their kids, or they probably walk around feeling all entitled. Or if they see somebody who's just very beautiful, they go, oh, they're probably just very superficial, or they're very vain. They assign a negative motive to every good action. Many walk around with unspoken expectations of others that are unrealistic. And so this person should be aware of my needs. This person should offer to help. This person should offer to spend some time. And if they don't, now I can be critical. Now I can be negative towards this person. But You expect everybody to be a mind reader. Double standard. You set the bar unrealistically high for others. They can never meet it, so now you can be critical. Inflexible. You believe things should be done a certain way. And if they're not done your way, then you find fault with everybody. You can appear very loving. You can appear very loving because of codependency. You can call yourself an empath. But deep down inside, you're not genuinely doing it for the right reasons. Deep down inside, you struggle to see good in others. People with this often rarely apologize because then they would look bad and others would be able to be negative towards them. So the bottom line is people who are negative and critical tend to suck energy from people. They're just hard to be around for long. They wear you out. And so what I want you to see is that the opposite of what you're hoping will come out of being negative critical, to improve and feel better about yourself, to get different needs met, the opposite actually happens. It actually makes things worse. So it damages you socially. People don't want to be around you. People don't feel good around you because you're criticizing and negative. People don't want to open up to you because they're afraid you're going to judge them and put them down. People often even lie to you because they're afraid of your criticism all the time. The bottom line is you become an unsafe person to people because you're so negative and critical. But more than that, this begins to affect you negatively. It takes you to a darker place mentally. It affects your mental health, your emotional world, your physical world. It can result in depression, anxiety. It can result in feeling hopeless and just wanting to give up. It ends up feeding shame instead of healing shame. Now, I need to say, we keep doing it often because we do feel better in the moment when we're negative and critical. It makes our limbic brain feel happy. It relieves some pressure. But in the long run, we end up feeling worse. It's so important to understand that if you're in recovery and you're going along and you're being kind of very seeing things accurately, you're in a positive place, but all of a sudden you notice you start being more negative again. This can be an early warning sign that the first domino is falling, that you're sliding back into a very negative, critical headspace. And that can be super dangerous for you because the more you slide into being negative and critical, the more you go back to old behaviors, the old ways of looking at things, the old distortions in your thinking, the more blaming of others, the more feeding shame. And it takes you to a darker and darker place and a return to old behaviors. So just be aware of that early warning sign that you're sliding backwards. To me, what is so important to understand about this is eventually, the more you stay in this negative, critical mindset, you might laugh and have a lot of fun, but you don't have true joy. You're not able to enjoy the present and have a deep peace and contentment. There's always a discontent. There's always a restlessness because you're focused on the negative. There's always an anger, a fear, a hopelessness that's a deep part of what you are and that is controlling you. So it takes away the ability to truly enjoy life. Somebody has said this: extended bouts of negativity can result in serious health problems. Negativity sends our bodies into stress or fight or flight mode. Our bodies are designed to deal with stressful situations by releasing cortisol into the bloodstream, making you alert and focused. Though some stress is good for us, too much can be detrimental to our health. Extended periods of negativity slows digestion, decreases the immune system's ability to fight inflammation. This is also why negative people are more likely to get sick than optimists. Some common effects of negativity include headache, chest pain, fatigue, upset stomach, sleep problems, insomnia, anxiety, depression, social withdrawal, drastic changes in metabolism, overeating, undereating. Prolonged negativity also hurts mental health, making individuals more likely to turn to smoking or substance abuse as a way of coping. So many negative effects, but to me, one of the most painful negative effects is the damage it does to our children. Our children need a safe, nurturing, validating environment where they're encouraged, where they can be authentic, where they're made to feel appreciated and accepted. But if you're negative all the time, finding fault all the time, our children do not feel safe. You are creating a complex trauma world for your children. It is not a safe world for them, and the damage that does is huge. So let's move to recovery. What are some things you need to be aware of? If this has been your life trap and now you're in recovery, what are some things that you need to be aware of that you might be sliding back into this life trap? First, be aware of any triggers that you might have today that take you back to being negative critical without you even realizing it. And this happens so easily, and this is why, to me, this is such a dangerous life trap. This happens subconsciously. You can be triggered and back into negative critical and not even realize it. So it's anything that triggers your limbic brain to experience negative emotions. That can take you back to becoming negative and critical again as a way of coping. So if you're feeling anger, anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, boredom, discontent, fear, that's stuff that all of a sudden you're negative again. If you've gone through a time of events in your life where you failed, or you're just more stressed than normal, or you're feeling overwhelmed, that can take you back to being negative and critical. If you're just feeling deep frustration, or you've got a bunch of needs that aren't being met in your life, your brain is going to get negative and critical. If you're lonely, if you're tired. But beyond that, anytime you're going through a change in life, times of change, could be good changes, but they create needing to live in the unknown for a while. They create insecurities. Sometimes you don't have a rock to lean on that's solid in those times. That triggers you. So times of transition, times of facing new situations, be aware of those times. Other triggers that some have is if they allow a resentment to grow inside of them, they all of a sudden just start getting more negative and critical. If they have a person in their life that they just are having trouble having any respect towards, all of a sudden they just get more negative and critical. Now I need to point out, there is a healthy type of critical, and we're talking about an unhealthy critical. So the healthy critical is that when I'm meeting new people, I need to spot warning signs, red flags that they're not healthy. I need to see signs that this is a narcissist. I need to stay away from them. This person is toxic. They are going to hurt me if I let them too close. That's healthy critical. That's what we call discernment. What we're talking about here is unhealthy critical, just focusing on negative. And so a big part in my recovery is learning when I cross from being healthy critical and slide into unhealthy critical. Because when I'm in healthy critical, I'm keeping myself safe. When I'm in unhealthy critical, I'm actually hurting myself and keeping myself unsafe. So let's go to healing. What will begin to help us change this life trap so I'm not negative critical headspace all the time? It starts with being mindful of it. So this life trap operates for most people in the subconscious world. They're not even aware of it. It pops to the conscious occasionally, but they need to become mindful of it. So take time each day to just do a body scan, emotion scan, to see if you can detect negativity, critical mindset existing inside of yourself. Start to become aware of it. And as you do, go deeper than that and go, okay, what's triggering this? What's going on that's caused my brain to go back to negative and critical? So be curious about it. Learn from it. That's how you begin to grow. But if you catch yourself and you realize I'm sliding into negative and critical, part of your brain is going to want to continue down that path and feed it. You need to develop ways to stop it. Don't feed it. And so for some people, that is, don't focus on negative around me and blame stuff. Don't focus on negative stuff in the news. Don't focus on negative stuff in social media. Stop things that would feed that negative mindset. And then out of that curiosity, go, okay, what are my issues? That's what I need to focus on, is my core stuff. If I don't heal and grow there, I'm never going to eventually change this negative critical mindset. And then work on seeing situations and seeing people accurately. Now, this is probably where you're going to need another person in your life who is healthier, who's wiser than you, that does see situations quite accurately and people quite accurately. So let's say you go and you meet with somebody and they're there as well, or you go to a situation, an event, and they're there as well. And then afterwards you go to them and go, okay, here's what I read in this person. Here's what I saw in this person. Here's how I saw this event. Am I seeing it accurately, or is it still distorted? Somebody like that you can debrief with, and they can help you retrain how to see things accurately. Another thing that is so helpful for people that have spent their life just seeing negative, being negative, is training themselves to be grateful, training themselves to validate themselves about positive things, seeing them starting to encourage themselves when they're feeling down with positive things. Next, you have to have boundaries with negative people. Negative people will gravitate towards you. They'll want to just talk negative about others and events and gripe and complain. And there's going to be an attraction to you. You have to set boundaries with people like that, or else it'll suck you into that. So have boundaries also about news, about social media, so that you're not just feeding your brain with negative stuff and with drama. And then for many people, some of their negativity and inner critic is fueled by past guilt, things that they have done. And that keeps them in a very negative place towards themselves. And so a part of growth and healing is forgiving themselves and not dwelling on past failures. And then not just setting boundaries with negative people, but spending time with uplifting people, with people who are encouraging, with people who are validating, connecting with healthy people. That is so important in all of this. So all of those things are many different tools that need to come into play if I'm going to change this life trap, if I am going to begin to not constantly be in this negative place, but to be in a healthier, positive place. Well, I hope that if you see that in yourself, maybe for the first time, that you'll begin to go, wow, that is hurting me, that is hurting others, that is hurting my children. I really want to change this. I hope it will help you to do that. It's the end of another Friday night. Thank you for being here.